So I really appreciate everybody coming tonight to have this discussion about Greenlawn and the improvements that we want to do over here. It's a beautiful place. It's an arboretum. Christine and her group has done a lot of work, with us, the Cemetery Commission, and we want to try to present some options to try to improve some burial options at the cemetery. So with that, Martha Lyons is our wonderful landscape architect that's actually designed something to sit there and present to you guys, to sit there and discuss, so we can sit there and have a larger discussion and collect ideas, comments, concerns, and whatever have you. I also have to note that we have a sign-in sheet that's going around. I would ask that all of you please sign in, put your contact information so we can reach out to you and ask you for any additional information. Sometimes sitting here and reviewing something real quick, you may have some questions for it later, you may have to go home, you may think of something later. We'll be in contact with you and have that discussion with you one-on-one. So without further ado, Martha.
Thank you, Ray. I was going to ask everybody to sit closer, but then I just realized, listening on the radio, coming out here, how much flu and COVID and RSV and every other virus could possibly be out there is swarming around. So I guess it's better that we're sitting far apart, at least for tonight. So can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. We're going to turn the lights down a little bit, and so everyone can see the screen. There's a light here. No, this isn't working. Okay. Oh. A little more, Ray? Can you do a little more? And I don't have a light here, so I'm just going to have to. Can everybody see that? It's clear enough? Okay, great. Well, thank you. I am really delighted to be here, to see so many people that have come out for this project. As many of you may know, I was involved with Greenlawn beginning several years ago when I was hired to do the master plan for the whole cemetery. And it was a really very rewarding experience. It has such a rich history, such an importance in the neighborhood of North Salem, and it just warrants so much attention, I think, in so many different ways. And I have to really hand it to those who were instrumental in getting the cemetery on the National Register, and then also to the Friends of Greenlawn who have been very aggressive about getting the Arboretum designation and also working on the restoration of the Dixon Chapel. So all of that is just really great. It's wonderful to see all of the efforts going on. So as Ray said, I was brought on to take a look at one of the first steps in implementing the master plan. And Ray is advancing slides back there, so I'm going to ask you to please advance. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, the master plan was completed in 2022, and the purpose of this project is to enhance the historic landscape of the cemetery per the recommendations of the master plan. And in the plan, Ray, if you could just advance, we did articulate a vision for Greenlawn Cemetery. This is sort of a long-term vision that we hope improvements that are made, changes that are made, enhancements that are made over time will keep this vision in mind, and the vision will guide those changes and enhancements. The vision is for Greenlawn to be a commemorative landscape that preserves the natural world, or honors those who were once part of that world, and that celebrates Salem history and is welcoming to all. And as you all know, Greenlawn is Salem's only public place of interment that is still active. The city does have several other smaller burying grounds scattered throughout most of the downtown, but this is the only active cemetery where grave sites are still, we're still interring people. So in the master plan, we did a lot of public engagement, and we asked participants to talk about what their one wish would be for the future of Greenlawn. And there were several things that were listed, and they're all here. Ray, next slide. And I'm not going to read them all, but you can see that the second one down was to provide more options for interments in all different forms. And when I say all different forms, there are several ways interments can happen today. We have the traditional full casket burial, which is something that was done for many, 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 many years. It's sort of the only option. And then the country is involved into one that encourages other types of burial. So dealing with cremated remains. Cremated remains can be interred in urns underground. They can be scattered, and they can also be interred in columbarium structures. We're going to talk about that a little bit more tonight. Next slide. So to honor that second wish, which was to think about ways that we could expand interment options, my team and I looked at the entire cemetery and identified 14 different possible sites for these new interments to be included. And you can see them on the map here, and they're all different forms. So the legend down here shows the different forms. So we have a columbarium wall, we have in-ground casket burial, we have in-ground cremation burial, and then scattering gardens. And you can see them all here. Next, please. So in moving ahead, the city and the Cemetery Commission took a step to see, let's try implementing one of these areas just to see what we can come up with. And it was important, I think, to the city in making this decision where to begin, to pick a location that would provide a lot of different options or had the potential to provide a lot of different options. So it would be an area that's previously undeveloped, one that was in proximity to a prominent historic feature or could take in a view of a historic cemetery or both. In this case, that feature would be the chapel itself. And it also, with long views to the west and north, took in very picturesque areas. Also, proximity to circulation routes and parking. And then also the ability to hold several different interment types. And this is why this area, which is a little hard to see in this image, but it's looking through the shrubbery, is the west slope that lies below the Dixon Chapel. Next. So to begin the process of thinking about how we might want to enhance this area, include new burials, I worked with the Cemetery Commission and the Public Services Department on a program. And a program is essentially a listing of the elements that we would like to see included, if possible. So they are developing multiple options for interment. So as I mentioned before, there are several different ways interments can take place. This would hopefully, in this site, we would try to incorporate at least two of those, one or two or more of those. An emphasis on cremation burials, and part of that, the reason for that is that full casket burials, while they are still desirable in Salem, they do take up a lot of space. And Greenlawn Cemetery has limits around it. It doesn't have extra land outside its limits right now that the city can expand into. So we're really utilizing the space that's within the cemetery. We want to do that as efficiently as possible. There was a desire to incorporate gathering spaces into this area amongst the interment sites to make it ADA compliant so that all persons of different physical abilities could access it and wander through it. Also a desire to maintain and enhance the view of the Dixon Chapel, protect existing trees, and then also to hopefully cover the cost of construction of the site itself with the fees that would be extracted from interment sales. So balancing basically revenue from interment sales with the cost of construction, and perhaps making a bit of a profit. Next. There was a process that we used to start doing design work. One of the most important things was to get a detailed survey of the property, the area. You can see the area here. It's right here. And that means getting precise grades, getting all of the trees and shrubs located, the paths and roads, their exact location, and also locating subsurface drainage, because that's something we absolutely have to consider in this property because it has a lot of water features in it and some issues with the existing drainage system. Next. As part of the master plan, we did an assessment of the trees that existed and shrubs that existed in those 14 areas that I had showed you earlier that were options for interment. And this area there were 39 in total in this area. And it was determined, again, by the arborist that did the assessment that there were about 17 trees in here that would really be considered to be really in good health, good or fair condition, that we should try to work around. And the others were either invasive species or in decline, and could be something that we consider for replacement. Next. We looked at the existing conditions then of this site, and there were some very tremendous assets. One is the natural topography, which is quite lovely, just the gentle slope leading down from the chapel to the road below. Pleasing views from Chapel Avenue looking westward down the slope and over the oldest sections of the cemetery, as well as Fountain Pond. And it is also an area that was not previously developed. Some of the challenges here, the chapel was not visible from the slope. So there's a lot of planting that obstructs views from the slope up to the chapel. To introduce in some types of interment areas, we would have to do some regrading. That's a challenge. We really tried to do, and you'll see this in the designs that we came up with, to accommodate the grades as much as possible, because it is a lovely, gentle slope. As I mentioned, the existing trees, we want to try to preserve as many as possible. And there was the dominant species of the trees I just mentioned were Malus and Taxus, and those are about 41% of the population there. So in that situation, we view that as an opportunity to diversify the species, if possible, with our new design. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is that from an outsider's point of view, professional designer, the entrance to the chapel, the front door, which is quite beautiful, is very hard to see if you're walking along the road in front of it. The road comes right up to the front door, almost to the bottom, comes up to the bottom of the steps, and so the setting for that front door is really not, I think, as pleasing as it could be. So we saw that as not only a deficiency, but also an opportunity. Okay. Next, Ray. So we were able to come up with 4 different concepts, and these are just in concept stage. They're really sketches, as you can see. And these are just some ideas, again, keeping in mind that program that I mentioned before, how we might be able to start introducing some new types of interments into this area and try to keep as much of the landscape intact as possible and the beauty of it. So this first design introduces 3 different new gathering spaces, and in each gathering space there is a columbarium wall. So you can see, just put this up here. These are 3 spaces. Each of these is about 45 feet on the long end and about 20 across. And the columbarium walls are just 45 feet curved. And the height of them is about a little over 5 feet. So I'm almost 6 feet tall, And next to these walls, I would just be sort of a little bit above the top of them. And this is a section that is cut through from the chapel down to the roadway. And you can see this gives a little bit more breadth to that setting at the front of the chapel, which we would like to do. So we're pulling a little foyer off the roadway, some steps that lead down to this gathering space here with some seat walls, and then the column-bearing wall here. You can see the seat walls and the column-bearing wall here. And then some planting to just cushion that, embrace that. And matching that are these two other gathering spaces with similar column-bearing walls. And we've tried to save as many trees as we can in here. We've also brought in ADA compliant pathways from each of the entrances to these gathering spaces. So here's one here, and then this one is coming off of Chapel Lab to the gathering space there. And this design will provide 600 interment spaces within the column-bearing walls. Keep in mind that all of these can be modified. We can also do hybrid, but we're really trying to put our possibilities out there at this point. Next, right. The second scheme is a little bit of a modification, very similar. The column-bearing walls are set into the slope in this design. So the other ones, they were set sort of on the front of these gathering spaces. These are set into the back of the slope here. So they almost act as retaining walls, although they won't be retaining walls, but they would kind of act as retaining walls, and the slope would come up behind them. And in front of the chapel, we retain, again, a sort of cascade of steps leading down to the space here. A lower retaining wall that's split, and then just planting below the space so there's some view, and you can see this here in the cross section. So planting below the columbarium, and then there would be a view. And in front of the chapel, we just created, again, a little foyer, and then put a different paving across the road, to just give it a little very subtle kind of apron, to just announce it. And this design will also result in the same number of columbarium niches. There will be 600. Next. Okay, so this one is a little bit different. What we've done here is we've kind of left the chapel intact, maybe doing a little clearing here to open up a view, because right now it's pretty obstructed. But all of the burial would be down here at the bottom of the slope. So this would be a continuous walkway that would be ADA compliant. And within the walkways are double-sided column-bearing walls. So there would be niches on both sides of the wall, 3 of them. And then the area here below, between the walkway and the road, would be an area for scattering remains. And these fingering-looking structures would be tablets that could be used to take the name, have inscriptions of those interred. And the rest of it is pretty much left intact. So there's sort of minimal grading here. A number of the trees, especially in the upper part, can be kept. And this provides 600, excuse me. So it provides 1,200 niches, and then it would be unlimited scattering. And then the final concept, right, is similar to the third, in that we have this walkway leading through. We did include gathering spaces at the north and south columbarium areas. But in this one, what we've done is we've worked with this setting of the chapel a little bit more. And this is just a notion that we had that seemed like it would be really lovely, but again, it's an idea, that this would be, the roadway would be actually narrowed. We keep the same alignment, and it would be edged with a decorative curb. And behind the curb could be columbarium, could be niches in ground. So those would be just placed behind the wall, and the curb would be used for inscription. And the wall would be melded with a retaining, or a seat wall that would define this overlook space across from the chapel. So this whole area would become really a feature in and of itself. I think it would be quite a lovely enhancement to the chapel's setting. And this also provides 1,200 niches and then unlimited scattering. And then along these, the walkway, there would be 125 in-ground barriers. Next. I just wanted to talk a little bit in relationship to that last design about the restricted area around the chapel. As many of you know, there's a preservation easement, and it's a 30-foot square, 30-foot offset from the chapel all the way around. And the terms of the restriction, right, okay, are here. And I think, I guess I should turn this over to Patty, but I'm not going to do that right now, but for an interpretation of this. But it does seem to me that there might be some wiggle room if we wanted to actually go ahead with to make some improvements just to that one side of the chapel to give it a little bit more prominence and beauty. Next. I think a number of people have asked me about columbarium walls and what do they look like, and this is a project that I've been involved in New York State, and these are columbarium walls that we actually designed, so they were custom made for this site. This was a former roadway that was closed, and we created this kind of cloister garden, and you can see the columbarium walls here. The niches have granite fronts on them, so they're very, very unobtrusive. And I know there's some concern about the bottom niches being too close to the bottom. And this does have a decorative, as you can see, sort of curving or edging on it, molding on it that gets them up off the ground. And they can really be designed in any way you want, but that would address some of that issue. Next. I think there's another image of them here. Yeah, and then another, these are under construction, and my apologies for that. And then this is another site that we worked on. It's just a semicircular wall, and as you can see, it's two level. So there are double urn niches here, and then these are single urns on the side. And then there's a gathering space in front. Next. I did a little very preliminary budgeting on this. Ray, do you want me to speak to this a little bit, or?
Yeah, you can try. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the cost of construction of these, it really ranges between the 1.1 to 1.8 million. And again, this is a very preliminary budgeting because we don't know a lot of details about the design at this point. The revenue would be between 1.6 and 3 million. And the number of internment spaces would range from 600 to 1,325. These are the price. This is the price of a existing gravesite at Greenlawn, and these are the columbarium. We did some research on other cemeteries in the area to see what they were charging, and then the cemetery in Danvers has a columbarium. Their units are 2,300 to 3,200, and Grove Hill and Waltham, they're 3,400 to 38. Next. So we welcome your thoughts and ideas and questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, back the room.
Can you tell us more about the scattering areas and how that works?
Yep, sure, yeah. Well, scattering...
Question so that people...
Oh, yes. The question was, could you tell us more about the scattering areas and how those work? So scattering in a cemetery typically is not, I'm sure you've known people that have had their remains scattered like off a mountain or in the ocean or something. That's not how this happens. Essentially what instead of, being in an urn or being in a box, the remains would just be put into a hole in the ground, just in the hole in the ground, and then it would be covered up and then planted over. So it's not scattering to the wind like you would think. And then the commemoration, if it's desired to have a name shown somewhere, there are many ways that can be done. And I showed tablets on this, but I've also seen monuments, columns. So again, that would be something that we would design to the city's liking if that was desired. Now, anybody else? Yes.
So the height you mentioned was 5 feet. What about the width? What's the dimension on the width on the columbarium?
The ones that you're seeing here are 45 feet long. So the actual niche spaces are 40 feet. So it's basically 5 tiers and 40 across.
So,
But they can also be different sizes.
so the pictures you showed with the smaller on either side of the big one, how tall is the big one?
Small, the one that is actually built.
Yes. Can you repeat the question for
Yes.
the video, please?
Thank you. You would have asked me that one more time. So the question was how high in the image that, where you might want to show that back again. The image where the built columbarium that was 2-tiered, remember that? And kind of wings on it. That one right there. So the wings are, the center one is about 5 feet 9 inches, let's say. So the wings are probably 4 feet, something like that. I think they're 2.
How thick is it?
How big is that?
Thick, how thick?
How thick? They are about 1 foot, 12 inches deep, and then they have, a back on them. The walls that have niches on both sides would be twice that size. And again, the details of the design have to get worked out, but that's sort of a rough idea. Anybody else? And I did repeat the question. Okay. Christine.
On this scattering garden, I did not know that, is it a requirement for them to be put in the ground, or can you scatter them in lines, which I've seen in other cemeteries? So,
Typically it is sort of put into a hole, not to be crude, but that's something the city would desire. I don't think there's any kind of law prohibiting it. Well, we're going to look into that. That's a policy that the
I
city
just
would want
never
to
heard of it in
consider.
the ground, I've only
Yeah.
heard, they have like white lines of them scattering, and then they eventually go into the ground, so to speak. So I hadn't heard, and I didn't know if it was a requirement to actually put that in the ground.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, do the scattered remains have to be dug into a hole, put into a ground, or can they be kind of spread across? And my experience is that they're, put into a hole, but it's possible that there may be some, cemeteries that allow that, and I don't know whether it's against the law or not, but we'll find out. If that's something that's desired, this is good to know.
Well, there'd be a price difference probably on both as well.
Possibly. Rich?
When you have the columbarium, do you also provide seating in the area?
Yes, so I didn't mention that, did I? Right, can you go back to, that's fine. Yeah, so in this one, we have seating in the form of benches here in the gathering spaces, and then this is a seat wall here that would be part of the overlook. So, and then this would be another gathering space here. The thing that's, I think, important about having a gathering space around the columbarium wall is it gives you a spot for an interment service. And the cemetery in foul weather can put up a tent. I think it's important to have, someplace where people can gather. And in this case, seating for those who want to sit down. So that's why we do them, but also as part of the program. Any other questions? Yes, Red Sweater.
So Concept 1A,
Yes.
Ray, concept 1A, if you were to take a laser and you shot it off the surface of the roadway straight out,
Right.
what's the height from the slope below, yeah, from there, what's the height of the slope? In other words, if that wall, I mean, you're saying maybe that wall would be 5 feet 9 inches?
Right.
What's the height of the slope?
Okay, so here's a person drawn at about, 5'6", something like that, and here's the wall, and you can see there's a visibility over it and down below. I think, if there's a concern about this, we can certainly do some more modeling of it. But I think that the sightlines will be pretty good, because you're up against these steps. I think that in this design, there might be 8 risers, so that's 4 feet. So just the steps alone you're up 4 feet.
It's 4 feet?
Yeah. And then I think in concept, it's 4 feet. So you're up above it. You think about 4 feet, and then you're another
If you're
5
an
feet.
adult.
If you're an adult, yeah. Yes.
Do you have any statistics on the popularity of cremation niches versus in-ground cremations?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I don't know that that's something that, well, first of all, I should just say, in Essex County, where we focused our research, there are not a lot of columbariums. There are 2 that I mentioned. I don't think that Waltham is actually in Essex County, but there are not a lot of them. So right now, like in Greenlawn, all of the cremations are going in the ground. I do know that the balance of cremations and in-ground full casket burials, but you didn't ask that question, so never mind, forget that. Yeah.
So another question is, from the standpoint of work that has to be done by the cemetery staff, what is the difference between the effort involved to prepare an in-ground site versus a niche? So in other words, if I've got somebody that I want to bury that's cremated,
Right.
so from the standpoint of the city's effort, is it more effort to prepare the in-ground spot, or is there a cost involved once the columbarium is up? Is there a work that needs to be done or how does that work?
Okay, well, I can't speak, so the question is about the amount of effort that's involved and cost involved in preparing an individual burial in a in-ground spot versus a columbarium. And I can't speak to the city's process or how in-ground cremations are done. I don't know if you have all, cremation liners. Anyway, there has to be an excavation, with a cremation, just like you would with a full casket burial. So there's effort that goes on with that. And placing a headstone. So these, with columbarium, the columbarium is built so it's ready to accept interments. So that all that needs to happen is, an urn needs to get purchased. And then there's an inscription or a plate put on the face of it to honor the interred.
How many urns would each niche accept? Are they designed?
2. Yeah, for companion.
So okay. And
But you don't have to put 2.
right. Is there a big cost difference depending on the materials used? Because I looked on the internet and it talked about all kinds of different materials used for the niches, including some that could have a glass front.
Right. Yeah, you see those on indoor columbariums a lot.
Right.
Yeah, it's probably outside. It's not such a great idea.
So do you anticipate that the cost projections that you put out there there wouldn't be a lot of variation based on changes in materials?
The costs that I showed are based on, those are real numbers for the columbariums we have designed recently and have had them installed. So if it was, made out of concrete, I probably wouldn't do that. I would not recommend that for Greenlawn Cemetery or anywhere for that matter. It's a different height. The design is a stock item. What I showed you, we design those custom for that site.
So when my parents were cremated and buried in ground, it was in a very small hole that was dug in the cemetery. There was no liner, there was no nothing. Somebody, dug on the fourth side, square wall. It was probably 6 inches bigger than the box on each side. And we dropped the box in and that was it. Now they had purchased already a full grave plot.
Right.
Because they didn't know how it would go. But I would have thought that would be considerably less work for the cemetery crew, for example, to just dig that little thing and then in goes the box and then on goes the dirt and then a headstone or the ground flush thing. But so not a lot of difference to me to unlocking the niche, really. I mean, a little bit more, but I'm curious on the pricing because in the master plan, you were using, I think, $750 for a grave in ground. $715 is the cost of an in-ground. And I was curious why that was so low and the niches were so high and how that affects the revenue. Because if it was reversed, and it was only, say, even $1,000 to open a niche, because just to send a cemetery worker down just to open the niche, and then to close it back up and we're done. If that was $1,000, and if it was, say, $1,500 or $2,000 to dig the hole for the box, wouldn't the revenue projections come out very differently?
Well, possibly, but remember that there's a limited amount of space at Greenlawn. You've got a plot now, and the city will. Oh, somebody has a plot now. I think the city allows up to 4 cremations in one plot, but there just aren't plots like that available. So there has to be some alternative to that. And the other thing too is, and this is very important, is that these sites need to be beautifully designed and beautifully integrated into the landscape. Otherwise, they're not going to be appealing, and that's what we're going to try to achieve.
Right. So, one other thing. Was there any discussion of the other options besides the West Chapel slip? Because it seems to have settled on that one, which is in some ways the biggest, most expensive project, and doesn't really provide much option for in-ground, whereas some of the other options do provide those other, broader options, which was one of the requirements.
Right.
I mean, one of the goals.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the question was there any consideration given to developing one of the other of the 14 sites that were identified in the master plan? Ray, can you answer that? Because I wasn't involved in those discussions, but.
So the question was there any discussions revolving other interment options?
Other sites.
Other sites. The question is yes. The Cemetery Commission reviewed the master plan, and we selected this site because it had the largest amount of options with the most amount of yield. So those two options, led to us to sit in and taking a vote of support by the Cemetery Commission to go this direction. So it was vetted through the Cemetery Commission through public process that way.
But it only, 1A and 1B only provide niches. They don't even provide scattering or in-ground.
Okay.
So they don't provide all.
So, but remember, these are final, these are ideas. Our job is to show you what's possible. And if it's desired to incorporate some other forms of burial, if it's possible, we can do that. We'll try to do that. If that is something that people, yeah. Yes.
Well, I live here in Salem, and Greenlawn is a treasure. It's a cemetery. It's an absolutely beautiful, peaceful, restful cemetery. It's also a park. Really, I mean, it's city property, and I don't think I'm wrong to call it a park because it's the only park in the north end of Salem, and everybody uses it as a park. Walkers go there, people walk their dogs, women push their baby carriages. It's really utilized as a park. And also if you go there in the early morning or at sunset, it's like a sanctuary. It's a whole different scene, and it's like a bird sanctuary, and it is used as a bird sanctuary. People come from all over to use that. And now we've got the Arboretum, which is planning to enhance the foliage and the trees and working about with climate change in mind, so that years from now, the things that we put in now will be beautiful then as well. I walk that path that you're doing, and there's no way that you can put up those walls. There's no design that you can put up those walls that they aren't ugly. I mean, I don't want to walk past those.
We missed that last sentence, and I'm trying to pay close attention to this because I'm interested in what you're saying. We can't hear what you ended up saying.
I said that I walk that path, and I don't want to walk past those walls. I don't think, however you design it, it's still a wall, and I think it's ugly, and I really don't think it goes with this cemetery. Maybe it goes in other cemeteries, but I don't think it's appropriate for Greenlawn. I don't know how many burials you have, and when you're going to run out, whether you have some years yet to continue to plan and maybe look for another site, or maybe things will change. I think people are getting interested in green burials. I don't know if you can have green burials at Greenlawn, but I think that if you talk to people, they really love Greenlawn. It's just a beautiful place to be. And I think it became very clear to people when we had the COVID epidemic that was a place that we could go and walk and be outside and be safe. And I don't want to see drastic changes made.
That's fair, yeah. Yes.
I'm going to offer a counterpoint to that comment, which is, I've lived here since 1990, and it's been, to me, very distressing to watch the full-size graves, creeping out to the edge of every road and expanding outside the side. And I've never looked into the price of a plot in Greenlawn, but I'm struck by the fact that that's probably the cheapest real estate in all of Salem. To me, that's a very small amount of money for the, frankly, inordinate amount of space that a full casket burial takes up. And with such a constrained space, I think the columbarium idea is fantastic because it would allow for so many more years of burials in a much more space-efficient way. And I think it could be quite beautiful. I mean, there's all different kinds of stone you could use. I mean, there's any number of ways that could be very attractively landscaped. And I think what's lost sight of in the last comment too is it also enhances and ties in with the front of the chapel. So I mean, I see just nothing but advantages all around. I mean, we're talking about space that's going to be chock full of full casket graves left to its own devices, or it can be landscaped into something that's space efficient and allows a lot of people to do a burial that's more compact. I mean, there is one, at least I know, of, mini columbarium in there already. I have a friend who bought a stone that has 6 compartments, and she bought it for her whole family. So, it's easy to add a person in there until the space taken up is the size of one stone. I think that's a step in the right direction in there, because if you want to see more birds, you want to see more trees, you want to see more wildlife, filling the thing stem to stern with rocks is not, to my way of thinking, the way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Following up on Margaret's question about what may be the limitation of a couple of the concepts with regard to the variety of interments that are available, if it was felt that there weren't enough in-ground burials included in that particular site, would you also, with the city, look at maybe one of the other 14 areas where you've identified appropriate for in-ground burials, so they can be developed simultaneously?
That's a great question. So the question was whether or not we need to look at other sites, or have we looked into the other sites as they relate to choosing this site first. Did I get that correct?
Correct.
All right. So the answer to the question is yes. The reason why, again, we selected the site that we did was, one, again, yes, it had the largest yield.
Use the mic so people can hear.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you, Paula. So to answer the question, yes, we did have that discussion. We chose this site because it had the largest yield back to help fund the other sites to help further interments across as they were designed. So the reason why we selected this one is because it had the most opportunity for that to regain that money back and, lessen the burden on the taxpayer about, the bond or the capital improvement or those types of items. So there's a lot of different reasons and discussions going into this selection of this site and in prepping for the other selections for the other improvements as we continue.
That's good.
Go ahead.
What this woman over here was saying about the walls sort of taking away, I understood. It was taking away that natural feel for the cemetery. And I think that's what many of us really love about Greenlawn Cemetery.
Right.
Have you, and I'm not aware of all the other sites you have. This is the first presentation I have seen.
Okay.
But on your other sites, is it possible to take the walls and put them on as borders somewhere so they are not smack dab in the middle of the cemetery, breaking up that nice natural rolling feel, and having them on the outside wall where they look attractive, but you still have the center that makes it look a little bit like a park, as she mentioned. I don't know if you've considered, because I don't know your other sites, and I don't know whether any of them are on the periphery at all.
Yes, my memory from
The question was,
did we consider proposing columbarium walls to the edges of the cemetery? And my memory of the cemetery is that most of the edges have burials going up very close to them. And so, to put up a columbarium wall, you need to have, enough room around it to get it in and then also to access it. So it would be wouldn't be possible in many of the areas. So, but that's certainly something that the city could consider in the future, I think. It's not something we propose for in the master plan. Okay, let me hear from someone else back. Yeah.
Couple of things. One is, I hope you can hear me through the mask.
We can hear you through the mask.
So one of the little biological, botanical questions that I had was, there's something like 40-some% of the species of this globe were between taxus and mollusk species. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And I think the mollusk species are the apple.
Yeah.
Right?
Crab apple.
And wasn't that the species, the special genetic diversity and heritage of the arboretum that's unique in the current biological genetic heritage that we're concerned about identifying, maintaining, and we're looking at taking those out of this area? And I was curious about the process of the identification of the specificity of the genetic heritage of those mouse organisms, those particular plants.
So I apologize, I'm going to push it a little bit. So what you're saying is crab apple trees that are identified on the western Dixon Chapel Slope are historic in nature and you want to see them preserved, and or are we removing them and why are we removing them? Is that basically the gist of your question?
No.
Okay, please.
What is the procedure that you have created to identify the mammoth species and their genetic heritage that they represent among those that you plan to remove from the slope?
Okay, so the question was, how did we identify the crab apple trees and how did we identify the lineage of those crab apple trees? Correct?
Are they the ones that we're really interested in discovering?
So in our plan, we worked with the Arboretum staff, we worked with Jacob St. Louis on site, we've identified those trees, we worked with the cemetery master plan on, making sure to save as many of those trees as possible. So we worked with also Lisa DeLisio from Sam State University and identifying those trees and select, right.
Okay, and the genetic heritage which they represent has been...
That is correct, they've been sampled and categorized, yes.
Oh, that's great to know.
Yeah.
And I had another thought, because I think what part of the discussion about the park quality and maintaining a sort of integrity within the natural features of Greenlawn as a park with gently rolling contour, and then the abruptness of imagining a wall structure within that. Didn't you have one option with the serpentine path and perhaps the columbarium walls are within like the slope and the retaining?
Yes, we did. So the question was there an option where the columbarium walls, I think it's 1B. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1B.
1B, yeah.
I think it's 1B. Yeah, so those, in this design, the columbarium walls are set into the slope.
Right.
They're not retaining, which is a really hard thing to, it can be done with a columbarium wall, it's very expensive though. So what we would do is set them against the slope. And here, these are, this is just a seawall here. So,
Can you clarify that the seat wall and placement, because I'm not following what you're caring about?
okay, so these are the walls, the higher walls. Excuse me, these are lower seawall. These are lower columbarium walls, and then this is the seawall up here. So this probably what I'm hearing here, this is probably the least visually intrusive because these things are really tucked in and up against the slope.
So that the soil behind the wall would be equal to the height of the wall?
No, it would not. And as I said, that would be, they would make it a retaining wall,
Okay,
which can be done, but it's very expensive. It would really raise the cost of it a lot.
okay.
So
Therefore, when you say, and just visually, it's helpful for us to visualize, if it's against the slope, can you describe the height of the wall versus the soil behind it?
well, so here's the wall here. If this is 5 feet high, 1, 2, 3, this contour right here would be the same height as the wall right here.
So in a matter of like 4 feet uphill, the hill would be the same height as the wall. Is that what you're implying?
More like I'm just looking at the scale of this. More like 10 feet up the hill.
Okay.
Yes, a question in the back.
Yes, I did. I've been looking for a nice site for my husband's remains since he passed 1 year ago. And I've been in touch with the cemetery since July many times. And I've said, what about this, what about this? And it's been sort of put off. Some of the sites I was looking at were then, sold or whatever, which is fine. But I'm just wondering, you might not know this, but is there some sort of a timeline? If this was not what I'm interested in, is there some sort of a timeline when I can expect those other sites to be, available?
And the question is there a timeline for sites other than this one to be developed?
No, not at this time.
And the answer is no, not at this time. Gentleman next.
On that same topic, as a family member, also looking in for a place of interment for a recently deceased family member, the City of Salem desperately needs a proper interface for helping people locate plots that are available, which they can inter their loved ones in. As it stands now, you call and you ask, and they say, well, we think it's this one and that one, and then, you call back and, oh, well, sorry, no, that's gone, or we don't know what's next. So this is just a general comment. There needs to be some interface, and in this internet age, it should be simple enough to do, to say, here are the available plots, these are your options, this is what you can choose from. At present, you're basically, pin the tail on a donkey, you have your eyes blindfolded, they spin you around and they push you up. That being said, I have a question on this design here, which is, why can there be, and why couldn't there be, in between these, columbarium plots and whatnot, internment plots, whether they are for caskets or for, for urns or whatever, is that envisioned, and why couldn't it be?
I think it's possible, certainly possible. The question was, could there be other forms of interment, incorporated into the open spaces on here? I think that that's possible. One thing that we would want to be really careful about is how those interments are marked. Because I know that my understanding is that many of the residents of Salem would like to sort of individually mark their graves or have a decision about how they are marked, choose their own monuments within a certain parameter. And what you don't want to do is load this up with a lot of different size visually vertical features, because it would just really, I think, destroy the quietness of the landscape. But it certainly could be done.
So, like at Waterside Cemetery, there's a huge area that just has little granite markers. There's a lot of people there. Little granite markers, and they're able to mow around them. They can be flat markers.
Yeah, there's a lot of different options for doing that. It's just, yes.
Patty, this is going to be a little unfair, but would the cemetery be considered open space for the purpose of the Community Preservation Act monies?
That's part of that as well. I think, so it's more about what the funds are used for, I would say, and what the project would be related to open space than necessarily.
Because I'm going to ask a follow-up. So it's a little uncertain whether this would be eligible for Community Preservation Act monies under open space. But my question is, the concept of taking Sergeant Road, removing Sergeant Road, expanding the cemetery out beyond to the farthest edge to get to Kernwood, and having the expansion capability, because we own Sergeant Road, having our expansion, at some point we're going to need to expand Greenlawn beyond this. My understanding is that we have right of first refusal on Kernwood land if they were to sell. But obviously, at the moment, we have control of Sergeant Road. It strikes me that Sergeant Road is not a critical roadway, and that could be expansion for in-ground and maybe even an edge wall that's not impeded by nearby graves at the moment.
I think that that has been discussed, and Ray, maybe you can comment on this. My understanding is there are a lot of utilities under that road. Is that right?
I would have to double check.
Yeah.
The question was, are there utilities under the road? Unfortunately, I don't have that answer.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's what I remember being told that at one point, but it was a while ago. And, yeah. Okay, anybody have any questions, Christine?
Yeah, in regards to the chapel, I appreciate you trying to highlight it. Hopefully it'll be restored one day soon.
Yeah.
One of the plans called for narrowing the road and one that adds cost to the project. Two, if you want to use the chapel for what it was intended, memorial services and/or services, you might need to drive a hearse or a family to the front door. So I'm not necessarily seeing or hearing that that's the best option for highway.
So it could be designed so it could accommodate the width of the vehicle. This is just this concept. I know that I don't know what the existing measurement, the width of it is, but it could be narrowed to accommodate a vehicle and still keep the pathway concept.
It's pretty narrow, so it's pretty narrow now.
Yeah, but it's probably not 8 feet. It's probably more like 11. So anyway, that's a good point.
I mean, you got money and then you got, you're changing. So anyway, just something to think about.
Any other questions?
Just a quick
Yes.
comment. I'll take a stab at answering that Community Preservation Act question because where we have spent Community Preservation Act funds in cemeteries, so far it's been for historic preservation. There's certain categories of spending that are allowed under that act. And so the short answer is that question's never arisen to treat a cemetery as a park for that purpose. But it occurs to me that perhaps the designation as an arboretum would tilt in favor of that view. So there is a coalition of towns that have Community Preservation Act. There's an organization that helps coordinate and communicate amongst the towns that have the act in place. And that's the kind of question I would take to that coalition and say, hey, has this come out? And they usually have an answer. So we could try to get that answer back to the Cemetery Commission. Email the coalition and say, hey, has this been done? I think the arboretum designation might be enough to make it something you should consider as a park.
Dual qualifications, historic and green space.
Right, yeah. Right. And there's I'm actually on our community preservation committee where I live, and there was a question about, preservation, how it applies to land, and whether it's maintenance. It's confusing. It can be confusing. Yes.
Back to the chapel again. Mr. Dixon gave the chapel to the city of Salem. So placed it up on the hill. It's the center of the entire cemetery. It's extremely important to not take that slope and make it dramatically different, that you can't see his bridge and the vision that was done so many years ago with the intent of the chapel being able to see Fountain Pond and the bridge and not. So that's why a lot of questions about the height of the columbariums, where they are.
Right.
Another concern is depending on which way you put them, because it is a slope, it is going to be a concern for drainage in a retaining wall. I mean, that's kind of what they're going to be, whether they're on this side or that side, because it's a slope.
No, they have to retain earth. These would not retain earth. So the drainage, you're right, the drainage does have to be carefully designed so that you are not allowing water to infiltrate into the foundation of it. Believe me, I've done this before, I know. And we had an engineer working with us on it, so. Any other questions? Okay, well, one more.
I just wanted to say that I'm really can't shake the, I really can't shake the thought that so much of this depends on the pricing that is chosen for the niches and the in-ground burials. And I just would like to suggest that the committee, or who's ever evaluating proposals, take a look at how the revenue projections vary depending on how much is charged for the different services. Because right now, the niches are priced quite expensively compared to, I'm not sure why the cost is so high.
Well, one is you don't have to buy a headstone.
Pardon?
You don't have to buy a headstone for a niche.
But, I mean, that's a pricing strategy of what the market will bear.
Okay.
Right? So I don't know, as a city-owned cemetery, if that's a philosophy that the town or the committee wants to take, that we will price what the market will bear, or are we considering pricing based on, more what it really is costing us to do this? And the difference between a niche versus an in-ground. So I just would like to suggest that a lot of the attractiveness of the revenue has to do with how you price the different options.
Right.
And that's not insignificant in terms of the net gain to the cemetery commission in comparing one option versus another. Not these options, but the options A through G or whatever were presented in the master plan.
Yeah.
If you flip some of those costs around, it will make the different proposals potentially look different. And some of them offer a broader variety of interment options than that is offered here. They're also less of a dramatic change for the cemetery that is offered here. They're also, being slightly smaller projects, they're less cash flow intensive. They're less risk. So, I think that I just would like to point out that how it's priced has a big impact on the attractiveness.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the commission, that's something the commission will have to, cemetery commission will have to take up with the city. Yes, Rich?
I'm just wondering, will the cemetery commission be conducting a market study in connection with going forward at this point, so that they can maybe pin down some of the questions about money that market has and other people as well?
That has not been I can't answer that enough. Yeah. Do you want to answer that, Jacob?
I don't know that it's been done yet, but I mean, it's something we discuss going forward.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I think this is going to get posted on the Salem Community Access, and so if you have any follow-up comments, you're always welcome to email Ray. His email address is listed on the flyer and also on the city website. But I appreciate all of you, all the comments that have been made. These have been very, very helpful and a lot to think about. So, Ray, do you have any other questions, or Jacob?
No, other than I appreciate everybody coming out. It takes a village to make sure that we get it right. We just want to make sure that we're, working in the right direction, identifying everybody's concerns, at least listening to you guys, hearing you. So I appreciate everybody for coming out. I really do.
Ray, can this be posted on the website, please?
I will talk to the mayor's office and see where she wants it to lie.
And just one other question. If we have more comments, what's the best way for us to, who do we contact?
To Ray. You send an email message to Ray. And his email address is on the flyer, and it's also on the website, the city website.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.